Hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing well and getting ready for a great Sunday, a great day of worship. I pray that God, finds you just being blessed truly by God. Our uh, our new lessons this quarter, uh, we're going to be in the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, the title of our lesson today is we start in Job with Job 1 through verses 8 through 22. The title of the lesson is Faith Tested. Believers show the depth of their faith in adversity. Now, why would a loving God allow one of his followers to experience the suffering that Job had to go through? Now, after our son Philip was sick, had to have the amputations, and we were asked by many people, a lot of friends, why would God allow this to happen to your little boy? Well, our answer surprised them. Our answer was sin. Now, not his sin and not his parents' sin, but the existence of sin in this world. You see, before sin came into the world, disease, decay, and death were not a problem. But once sin entered into the world, then mankind had to deal with those three things on an everyday basis. Now, in this opening session of our study of the book of Job, we're going to have the opportunity to think through how we might respond to God if we are suddenly facing the loss of everything that we hold dear. Now, the book of Job is going to be very challenging for us. And most people think that it's a book about a man named Job who had a rough life. But if we focus on that, we're going to miss the main character. And you know who the main character is. It's God. One of our key questions today is, was Job really a real person? Now, the short answer to that is yes. But how do we know that? Well, there's several reasons. The prophet Ezekiel, he spoke about Job as a historical figure in Ezekiel 14:14. And then James, the half-brother of Jesus, identifies Job as one that was tested by God in the book of James. So we see in the Old Testament, New Testament references to Job. Paul, the apostle, wrote he quoted Job twice in reference to who God really is. Now, the Bible tells us that Job lived in the land of Uz, however you want to say it. Some say that was what is modern day Uzbekistan, but that's probably not real accurate because that's not really close to the area that this took place. Now, Uz was a man. He was a descendant of Shem, Noah's son, and probably lived in the area that is now the southwest part of Jordan on the east side of the Dead Sea or the Jordan River. Now, the author of the book is not named. We don't know for sure who wrote it, but the Talmud, which is an early Jewish law book, it identifies the writer as Moses. But that's not widely accepted. But now we do know from reading the book of Job that he suffered great loss at the hands of his real enemy, who was Satan. Now, Job lived during a time of the patriarchs, probably about around 2000 BC. This would be the same time period as the days of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Now, Job lived to be well over 200 years old, which was common for that time. And but there are conflicting opinions about when the book was the book written at the same time as it happened, or was it much later? The date is not really sure. But Job's wealth is measured in livestock. Now, that's commonly done in the time of the patriarchs. His leadership at home shows that he was the priest of his family. And he had one wife and 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, the big question is, why is this book important? Well, it was written to help us understand that this story of Job really happened. It's not a fairy tale. It's an historical account of what happened in a man's life by God's design. God is in charge. We see, first of all, in Job chapter 1, starting with verses 8 and 9, that permission was granted. It says, then the Lord said to Satan. Now, Satan was coming before God, and God asked him, what you been doing? And he said, well, I've been roaming around. And so God, then it says in verse 8, and then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity. Now notice it didn't say he was a perfect man. It says he was a man of perfect integrity, who feared God and who turns away from evil. And Satan answered the Lord, well, does Job fear God for nothing? When God learned that Satan was, who is the accuser, had been roaming the earth, he asked him if he'd come across Job, his servant. And he described Job as God's servant, a very special servant. Now we know from verse 1 that Job was a man of integrity. And it said, God said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Now the title servant indicates that Job, that God considered Job a special servant. The word servant means that he was he provided humble service to God. We don't question Job's godliness. In fact, God said there's no one else like him. The Lord describes Job in a unique way, and by doing that, he uses 3 phrases to describe Job. First of all, he says Job was a man of perfect integrity. Now, the root idea of the Hebrew word perfect means complete. Doesn't mean sinless, it means complete. Now, when you connect that concept to the Hebrew word integrity, it just conveys the idea of complete, steadfast loyalty. Job was loyal to God. Secondly, Job was a man who fears God. To fear God includes having an understanding of God's holiness and his power as the creator. It includes a sense of awe and submission to God. Now, third phrase, God says Job is a man who turns away from evil. The Lord is telling Satan here, have you noticed Job? He's like me in character, not like you at all. Satan, true to his evil character, he responded to God with a rhetorical question that implied Job wasn't really as godly as the Lord thought he was. The question, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan here is questioning Job's character. Well, it's not really questioning Job's character. He's questioning Job's motivation behind his character. Now, did Job obey God in order to prosper? Satan claimed that Job served God for the potential material benefits that he might receive by serving God. Now, Job was wealthy. He was a wealthy man. He had a large family who surrounded him with love, and all of these blessings. Does that indicate that Job was protected from the difficulties of this world? Satan implied that if these blessings were taken away, would Job's character crumble? You see, God had blessed the work of Job's hands. Everything Job touched, multiplied, turned to gold. Some Bible scholars point to this verse as the whole purpose behind the book of Job. That poses the question for us, Will we continue to devote ourselves to God for just who He is and not for what He can do for us? That's a good question. Job chapter 1, verse 10 and 11, it says, Satan is speaking to God here, and he says, haven't you placed a hedge around him, his household, and everything he owns? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, and he will surely curse you to your face. You see, Satan accused God of putting a hedge of protection around Job. The idea of the hedge comes from an agricultural practice, specifically in the care of a vineyard. To protect the vineyard from intruders, human or animal, the owner of the vineyard would plant a hedgerow of tall, thorny plants around the vineyard to keep unwanted visitors out. Now, Satan's accusation was that God had put a hedge of protection around Job and around his household and all of his possessions. Satan said to God, you have blessed the work of his hands. That's good that Satan recognizes that those blessings come from God. The Hebrew word blessed actually means something that only God can do. Satan implied in his accusation that what man wouldn't stay devoted to God if God continually tipped the scale in his favor. And so he's saying, Job is faithful to you because you have always blessed him. But now the test that Satan proposed in verse 11 would reveal what sort of man Job really was. The story of Job doesn't negate the words that Paul used in Romans chapter 3, verse 10, where he says, there is no one righteous, no, not one. Paul was clear that no one is righteous, but Job did not live a life of absolute perfection because he was truly a man. But Job passed this test that Satan wanted to give him because of the way that he responded in the face of loss, the loss of his wealth and his health. His response revealed no flaw motive for his love of God. Job was innocent in a sense that he did not deserve the tragedies that had come upon him. Job is not portrayed as sinless, but he demonstrated his innocence in the way that he responded to those tragedies. We know there's only one truly innocent and righteous and perfect person who ever walked this earth, and that's Jesus. Now, in many ways, the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness serves as a picture of what happened to Job, only in reverse. You see, the accuser tested Job by taking away all the blessings. Jesus was tested by being offered all the earthly blessings. But both Satan refused to give in to his accusations. The accuser presumed Job loved God as a means to an end, the end being material prosperity. It's almost as if Satan painted a picture of God as some sort of cosmic vending machine, and if you insert enough tokens of obedience, then you can expect a reward from God. So Satan believed that when all of Job's material possessions, blessings, were taken away, Job would curse God. But we'll see how that happened. Now Job chapter 1, verse 12, God says, very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself. So Satan left the Lord's presence. Now the Lord responded to Satan with two realities. First of all, God's permission for Satan to test Job and test his faith revealed that God had complete confidence in Job. God allowed Satan to have power over everything that Job owned. That included his crops, his herds, and most of all, even his family. Now, secondly, the Lord responded to Satan and revealed Satan's limitations in this process. Satan could exercise power over Job only with the Lord's permission and only to the extent that the Lord allowed. Now, at this point, Satan was forbidden from laying a hand on Job himself. He could only strike his possessions. Today, as believers, we can be sure that Satan seeks opportunity to attack God's faithful followers. He wants to attack you and me. Although Satan is in rebellion against God, he is still subject under God's authority. And he can only do what God allows him to do to us. But he seeks those opportunities to test us. Now, in the next passage, we see the attack executed. Job, in verses 13 to 15, he says, one day, when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and reported, while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing nearby, the Sabines swooped down and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, in verse 4, Job tells us that Job's 10 children, and probably their spouses, normally gathered together in one of the son's homes for parties. Now, Job and his wife, evidently, they didn't attend these parties, but since Job was a very righteous father, he realized that these parties were filled with eating and drinking wine. And so he was afraid that his children might be tempted to sin by drinking too much and curse God. And on this particular occasion, Job nor his children realized the danger that was about to fall upon their family. So there's a series of four attacks. Four attacks suddenly begin to happen. And the first one we see in these verses. The messenger came and reported that a band of marauders had swooped down and stolen the family's oxen and donkeys from the field. The thieves made off with at least 1,500 animals that were valuable to the family's farming operation. Now, who were these Sabines? They were a band of nomadic traders, probably Bedouins, from the desert region of Arabia. They not only stole Job's oxen and donkeys, they killed all of his servants except for that one. And he came to report to Job what had happened. And then you read in verse 16, he was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, God's fire from heaven fell. It burned the sheep and the servants and devoured them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So here's the second attack. The second messenger reported the loss of all of Job's sheep, along with the shepherds that were taking care of the sheep. Now, the cause of this disaster wasn't because of some wicked marauders, some men. Instead, the messenger said that God's fire fell from heaven and it killed all of the sheep and the shepherds. This description probably refers to a lightning strike. And by slaughtering all of Job's 7,000 sheep and his shepherds with a lightning strike, Satan was sending a message to Job. He was saying, hey, Job, the God you're so devoted to caused all of this. What do you think of him now? Well, we'll see what he thinks of him in just a moment. Verse 17, it says, that messenger was still speaking when yet another came and reported, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on all the camels and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So here's the third attack. Another messenger arrives while the second messenger is still speaking. And very much like the first report, this was caused by another marauding tribe. This time it was the Chaldeans. They were associated with the area around Babylon. Now, in Job's day, the Chaldeans, probably the name Chaldeans probably described a nomadic tribe of traders that traveled back and forth across the northern desert of Arabia. 3 bands of these Chaldeans targeted Job's herd of 3,000 camels. The 3 bands of thieves made a raid and stole all of the camels, and his workers were no match for those attackers. And they struck them down and killed all of Job's servants with a sword, except for that one. And now then we come to the fourth attack in verse 18 and 19. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on the young people, so they died. And I alone have escaped to tell you." Now this fourth tragedy, a messenger arrives to inform Job that all of his children have been killed as they were partying at the oldest brother's home. Just like the second disaster, nature caused this catastrophe when suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. Now, the fact that the storm struck the 4 corners of the house may mean that it was a rotating wind, or we would call it a tornado. And tornadoes can reach incredible wind speeds, and they can destroy anything, even brick and stone structures. Now, the house collapsed on the young people, and they all died. And once again, one messenger lived to tell the story that not only Job's 10 children died, but also all the household servants also died. Job, his whole world suddenly collapsed in the dust. He probably was wondering, why, Lord? Why is all this happening to me? And within just a few minutes, Job was hit from all sides with the most devastating news, each one worse than the one before. These 4 tragedies appeared to Job that all the forces of heaven and earth had turned hostile towards him. It's important that we note that Job didn't know, he was not aware of the exchange between God and Satan, and he had no explanation for all of his losses. But as believers, we're not immune from experiencing tragedy and loss in our lives. Suffering is no respecter of persons. But the good news is we see that trust was maintained. Job continued to trust God. The first part of verse 20, it says, "Then Job stood up, tore his robe, and shaved his head." Job grieved deeply about the tragedies that had overwhelmed him. He did 3 things to express his grief. He stood up. His faith was still strong. I'm sure at some point he had a lot of questions that he wanted to ask God, but he acknowledged his faith was strong and still in God by standing up. And then secondly, he tore his robe. Tearing your robe was a sign of great sorrow. We see it even through the Old Testament. The Hebrew term robe referred to his outer garment. The outer garment was a sign of a man's prosperity and his status within the community. And then we see the third thing is Job shaved his head. Shaving your head signified great humility in the face of bitter loss. Now, thick, flowing gray hair was a sign of wisdom. I agree. But to shave his head signified a deep despair, and a feeling of emptiness had come over Job. And so we see in the second part of 20 and verse 21, it says, he fell to the ground and worshiped, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, although Job was filled with grief and despair, he knew where to turn, and he knew what to do. He fell to the ground and he worshiped the Lord. In a short poetic prayer, Job expressed 3 amazing affirmations. These affirmations were life principles by which Job had lived his life so far. And these statements give him a sense of purpose, even in the face of this devastating loss. Now, first of all, Job said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. This statement, Job affirms that human life and all of its material blessings are gifts from God, to be managed, not owned. Job arrived in this world naked. Of course, that's a literal description of childbirth. All babies are born naked. The term naked can also have a figurative meaning, and that when we arrive, not only are we naked, but we have no position, no power, and no possessions. In that sense, every one of us then will leave this life naked. We will not take any of our position or power or possessions with us. Whatever we possess in wealth, however many children we produce, whatever fame we enjoy, all these things are going to be left behind when we die physically. And we go to the afterlife naked. And second, Job affirmed God's rules over, that God rules over human life with his statement, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. The Lord is in charge. God later reminded his wife of this truth when he asked her, should we accept only good from God and not adversity? See, all that we are and all that we have are gifts from God. The Lord, in his wisdom, knows what we need. And he also knows when to remove the blessing to help us to love him more. The third affirmation, Job declared that in the middle of devastating loss, the name of the Lord should still be blessed and praised. That is an amazing expression of faith and devotion. Job 1:22, it says, throughout all of this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. That is significant. That needs to be our model. The Hebrew word translated sin basically means to miss the mark. Job maintained a high standard of faithfulness. He trusted God in the good times, but he also trusted God when life fell apart. And later in chapter 13, verse 15, he expressed his faith like this. He said, even if he, meaning God, even if he kills me, I will hope in him. Most of us don't experience the level of suffering that Job did. However, we can learn from the way Job responded to his suffering when we do face suffering. If we love God only for what he gives us and not for who he is, then we're serving ourselves and not him. No matter what we might suffer, we are always in the hands of a loving God. Sometimes, in his wise providence, God allows us to face suffering to strengthen our trust in him. And that is the voice of experience. You see, 3 weeks after our daughter and 2 grandsons were killed in an automobile accident back in 2004, it was spring break, and we went to visit our son-in-law and our oldest grandson who wasn't in the accident. John, our son-in-law, he told us that people always come to him and want to talk about the accident. And that just reopens those wounds, and that grief gets all over him again. And he said, I think Satan is sending them to me to cause me more pain. And he said, and I've decided that every time someone brings up the accident, I'm just going to tell them about Jesus. Well, I told him, I said, John, that's a good idea. Because if Satan is sending them to you, he'll quit because he doesn't want you telling them about Jesus. But if it's not Satan, it may be God sending people to you that need to hear about Jesus. So don't quit. You see, we're going to face suffering, and we're going to face trials and difficulties in this life. But how do we handle it? We stay faithful to God. Now, the most important point of this story for us is Jesus. He is the truly innocent and righteous servant of God who suffered so that we would not have to face the greatest tragedy of all, that is being separated from God, from his presence for all eternity. Jesus took the curse of death upon himself for our sin, so that we, like Job, could rise and bless his holy name. I hope you have a great day. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for the encouragement that we see in the life of Job. Lord, thank you. We know that suffering comes to all of us in different ways. But Lord, help us to stay faithful like Job did and to bless your holy name in spite of the struggles that we have to face in this life. We love you, Lord. Now bless everybody and help us to have a great week as we share Jesus with people we meet. And it's in his name that I pray. Amen. God bless you. Have a great day.